on that. Taylor McHargue, ESPN College Football Analyst, with us on Fridays at 4:30. Taylor, thanks for your time. I know you're doing Cincinnati this week, and we'll get to that in a minute. What are your thoughts about Kansas and also TCU in that game on game day and the fact that both teams are 4-0 and 5-0?
Well, I think it's fantastic for both, and honestly, I think it's fitting, and it's kind of funny that Texas and OU, it's their last year likely in the conference. I think the way this shakes out in the offseason, there's a decent chance that this is their last year in the Big 12, and that both of them are down. And, this is the first year that since 98, that they're playing the Red River rivalry, and neither are ranked. But back to the team that has game day hosting this week, Kansas and TCU. I love the story for Lance Leipold in Kansas. I think at some point, I do think the music's going to stop because they haven't, they only played one top 60 defense, and that was Iowa State, and they didn't look great on offense. And they haven't really been tested much on the defensive side as well. And when they have, they've had a couple of performances where they gave up 30 plus. So I like TCU in this game to win. I think there's too much speed for TCU relative to Kansas. However, it's going to be a fantastic environment. This is the type of environment that you may see TCU roll out and try and do too much. And if they turn the ball over, Kansas has a chance in this game. But I just think it's good for the health of the conference that these two teams are playing well and at the top of the conference alongside Oklahoma State right now.
Taylor, the other one outside of Red River that's pretty interesting to me is Tech and Oklahoma State. Now, Tech is a team that's not going to go away. Oklahoma State, made a statement last week winning here in Waco. How do you think this one's going to shake out in Stillwater?
Well, to this point, Tech has not looked great on the road. If you go back to NC State earlier in the year, Donovan Smith really struggled in that first half. And then, on the other side for Oklahoma State, you hit the nail on the head. Impressive against Baylor on the road. The special teams play, obviously coming out of half, I believe it was, that was huge. And you have to have stuff like that when you play on the road. Oklahoma State is gettable if Tech plays well, but I don't trust Tech to this point in the season on the road. To me, they've looked like a totally different team when they're at Jones AT&T Stadium versus when they go on the road. So I like Oklahoma State here. And look, I think the top of the Big 12, the top 3 or 4 teams, anybody's gettable. There is not a team at the top that you say, okay, we got a clear front runner. I even think Texas has a chance if Quinn comes back this week and is healthy and they get a win against OU. Nobody's really talking about Texas. They still have a chance. So there's some parity in the top 3, 4, 5 teams in the Big 12 right now.
Yeah, Taylor, I think we were saying earlier that Oklahoma, they're playing with fire. They're out of this bad boy if they lose tomorrow, basically with 3 conference losses. But you've mentioned it now a couple of times. Ewers will be back for UT. They've been playing well in his absence. Hudson Card did an admirable job, even though he wasn't 100%. And here they are, seemingly as the overwhelming favorites in this game tomorrow. Dylan Gabriel, I saw a picture of him in a suit, but it's kind of hard to imagine he'll play, but I guess you kind of have to keep that wild card in mind. So with all of that going on, how does Texas not win this game, or how does Oklahoma win this game tomorrow?
Yeah, I would say best on best, I think Texas has the advantage because OU's still banged up in some spots that don't include quarterback. And so even if Dylan Gabriel comes out and plays and Quinn Ewers plays, I like Texas in this game. I do not like, if I was a betting person, I do not like this number almost to 10 points for Texas. If you go back just historically in this series, it's a 1-score game, and it doesn't matter. Usually coming into the series, there's been a handful of blowouts here and there, but for the most part, this is a 1-score game. It's close. Going back to even in the COVID year, it tends to be a game that it's hard for one team to run away from. That being said, if Dylan Gabriel doesn't play and Quinn Ewers does play, you may see something pretty similar to what TCU just did to Oklahoma, because if there's one thing Steve Sarkisian does really well, one of the best in the country, is create explosive plays. They've got the dudes on the outside to do it. They have an all-world running back. The skill talent is there. And if OU is struggling to keep up on the other side, this may turn into a blowout a la what TCU just did to Oklahoma last week.
All right, so you have Cincinnati and USF this weekend?
That's right, Cincinnati, USF.
USF, obviously they're struggling. Jeff Scott's struggling. Gary Bohannon at quarterback. And Cincinnati, after what was a just not quite ready for that game with Arkansas, seems to have turned the corner a little bit. What do you see from Cincinnati right now?
I think Cincinnati's the clear favorite in the American Conference. Houston has obviously been disappointing. UCF did look interesting on Wednesday night. That was the best UCF look this year. But Cincinnati they have an elite defense. Jeff Scott, the head coach of South Florida, on our call with him this week, said this is the best all-around defense that he's faced since the 2017 Alabama defense. And I don't know if they're quite that good, but there are 3 or 4 guys on the Cincinnati team that are going to play in the NFL. Ivan Pace Jr. is leading the nation in tackles for loss, and it's not even close. He's unbelievable. On the other side for South Florida, if you haven't been following South Florida and you're a Gary Bohannon fan and you kind of wrote them off, they're not very good right now, and I don't think I've ever seen a team have to deal with more in one season than they have. Just right off the bat, they had to relocate all of last week for a hurricane. They have 14 guys in their 2D scholarship players. 14 are hurt right now, with another 5 guys that are playing with broken wrists or hands and casts on their hands. And they just can't catch a break. From week 3 through week 9, they have one true home game because they got relocated last week. So I'm making all the excuses for them. Coach Scott again said this week, nobody cares. We got to play better. But I'll make the excuses for them. They have not had a single thing go their way this season, and I don't think it'll go their way tomorrow. They're 4 touchdown underdogs, and Cincinnati's just a much better team, and they get them at home for homecoming.
Jeff Scott's one of those coaches that needs a good finish. Otherwise, he's got to have to deal with some questions at the end of the year, if not before, especially going how coaching firing goes. Taylor, what do you think about some of the things that have happened coaches firing wise this season? Paul Chryst just last weekend. It could be Brian Harsin and Scott Satterfield in the next couple of weeks. This is kind of crazy and hard to kind of wrap your arms around, but what have you thought about it so far?
Yeah, I'll say one thing real quick on Jeff Scott. Everything that I've heard and what I've read and the conversations with them, I think he's safe for at least this year. And I think he gets one more after if they struggle like they have this year, next year, then, we'll see. But I think he's safe for one more. Paul Chryst was interesting to me, and I think it surprised me like it did everybody else. But I thought the athletic director's comments about how this was a decision for their vision of the next 3 to 4 years, meaning the new TV money that's coming in. They didn't feel like Paul Chryst was getting Wisconsin where they ultimately want to be, and that is a playoff team when the playoff expands. And whether Wisconsin, have they had that look in the mirror moment where you say, who are we really? This does not scream that to me, because at Wisconsin, if you average 9 wins a season, normally you'd be pretty happy with that. They're firing of Paul Chryst, and when they did it, to me says, we're going to try and go out and make a splash with who we hire next. It was interesting. However, I also thought it was interesting that he agreed to about half of what his buyout was. But this is going to be throughout college football moving forward, especially with the transfer portal era. If schools are ready to move on from a coach, there's no reason for them to wait through the season. You may as well fire early, especially if you're a program like Wisconsin or an Arizona State where you feel like you can get your pick of the litter. Fire early, go out, try and get your guys so that they can build a team, hit the ground running as soon as the regular season's over.
Taylor, did you get a chance to catch any of that UCF game by any chance against SMU?
I did. I watched almost all of that, and I was really surprised in a positive way at what Central Florida did. I was really underwhelmed by what SMU put out, especially in the second half. SMU, to me, was one of the dark horse teams to compete for the conference this season. But their last 3, and I'm thinking about Maryland, TCU, and now Central Florida, it hasn't been an easy stretch, but they have not answered the bell in really any of those 3 games.
Yeah, it seemed like UCF, that was nice, but golly, Tanner Mordecai, and it doesn't seem like he has any kind of anything around him, and he's running for his life as well, which, of course, for any quarterback, that's not a good deal.
Central Florida did a good job of getting pressure on him and oftentimes it wasn't really bringing a fifth or sixth defender. I mean, UCF, especially in the second half, they got after him. The thing that was most frustrating to me was SMU's decision to go for it on fourth down at like their 37-yard line, I think is what it was, and they ran a bootleg that was the exact same play they'd run in the first half, and UCF was all over it. And I just thought it was not a great spot to do it. It was still a one-possession game. It wasn't a creative play call, and momentum shifted to Central Florida on that play, and it never came back. There was after that, it just turned into a rout.
Yeah, Taylor, I think UCF's got to really be kicking themselves for that loss to Louisville earlier in the year. They would be 5-0 right now and maybe getting a little more love nationally.
Well, they've found something in the downfield passing game in the past few weeks that they didn't against Louisville. I think John Rice Plumlee threw for like 140 yards in that game. All of his completions were underneath. He averaged like 4 yards of completion in that game. And since then, they have figured out a way, 5 on the outside. I think his last name's Baker. He's done a really nice job for them. And they have manufactured ways to get him the ball. And anywhere in college football, but especially in the American, you have got to figure out a way to get chunk plays in the downfield passing game. And that's one of the things that even Houston struggled with outside of Tank Dell. And I thought Central Florida had a similar issue because we know John Rice Plumlee can run the ball, but they have got to be able to drive the ball downfield, and they didn't do it against Louisville like you mentioned.
You mentioned Houston. Taylor, one more question about them. Do you feel like they can somehow right this ship?
Maybe, because they've got the pieces, but the thing that I worry about for Houston is what is the relationship like internally? I'm worried about, you see Dana, yelling at the crowd, and it feels like he's almost starting a war with their own fan base sometimes. And I know he's fiery, and sometimes he can be a love him or hate him type head coach. That's the only thing that I worry about for them internally is what does the locker room look like? And that's the piece that honestly none of us know. But if they come out next week and they get, or I guess it's tonight rather, if they get rolled by Memphis tonight, it may be a pack it up and they've just mailed in the rest of this season.
Yeah, thank you very much, Taylor. Appreciate your time. Former Rice quarterback, college football analyst for ESPN. He has Cincinnati and USF. Gary Bohannon this year. Thank you, Taylor.